But thank you for coming. Thanks for giving us a chance to do this. Nick is right. I am like passionate about product. When I discovered product, and it was like the year 2000 that I discovered product. I didn't know what it was. When I started doing it, I was like, where has this been all of my life? It was like the most natural, intuitive, fun thing I'd ever done, and have stayed in it now for 23 years doing product, and just love it. I want to get into this a little bit before we get into the meat. I just, those of you that know me, there's some of you here that work with me or know me or whatever. This won't shock you, but I was just going to highlight one thing here real quick, which is I really like to have fun. And the majority of my spare cycles, like if you ever look at Dan, and you're like, man, he looks really intense. What's he thinking about? What I'm thinking about is like, what is the next way I can have fun? Senior and leadership and product, things like that, I spend more time thinking about it. But the problem is that there's too much variance, in my opinion, in the awesomeness of the product people that I work with, right? Like you've got some people that are just complete rock stars. You have other people that have the aptitude, but it hasn't been unlocked yet, right? And so I spend time thinking about this problem, which is like, as a product leader, I'm like, it'd be ideal if I could find people with aptitude and every single one of them could be off the charts somehow. How do I do this? I spend time thinking about like, how do I solve that problem? And so I went for inspiration to Midjourney because I thought, and this is classic in my approach to how I think about product. I usually start with a problem, and then I skip past a bunch of stuff and I say, what would the resulting value be if I could solve that problem? So I'm not thinking about the solution. I'm not thinking about other things. I go from problem to value. Like what would the value, how would the world be different if the problem was solved? Don't even bother with how would you solve the problem. So in this problem, this is how I think about it, which is the value would be you could have a rock star assembly line, right? And so that was the prompt I put into Midjourney, and this is what Midjourney thinks rock star assembly lines would look like, which, okay, I can see where it's coming from. But some of the values you get there, right? You'd have better products, right? You would create value faster. You would make your customers happier, then your employees would be happier, and the world would be better, right? If you could solve this problem, if you could create higher consistency and lower variance. I feel like this mic is going in and out, but so if you can solve the problem. So then the next thing I step to in my product process is once I look at what is the value that could be created, then I go to, okay, there's some implied capabilities that have to exist to generate that value. So what are in this problem and this resulting value, what are the implied capabilities that would have to exist? And the first one is you'd have to believe that you can consistently find people with rock star potential, right? You have to have some way to do that. The second thing is you would have to be able to help those people know what they're supposed to do. What does a good product manager look like? What is that supposed to do? And then the third thing is you'd have to provide them or arm them with tools and knowledge to be able to do that. I was like, hey, if there's probably more, but at least those three things, right? You'd have to believe that you could do those three things to build your product management rockstar assembly line. And so that's actually the construct, and this is a guiding kind of framework for the conversation today. I want to talk about what do rock stars look like. I want to talk about how do you help them know what they're supposed to do? And I want to talk about how do you give them frameworks that unlock this capability. So as we step into it, the first thing that I'll say, I was asked a few years ago to go over to BYU and do a lecture. Several times a year I'll go over there and I'll do a lecture. And the topic they wanted me to talk about to their product management club was how to be a rock star in your first product management role. I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I did some brainstorming, and I actually reached out to my network of other like product leaders, VPs of product and CPOs and stuff, and said, hey, how do you guys think about this? And pulled that all together. It was really interesting, the pattern that we detected as we looked at the responses from everybody, as we talked about it together. It was all about the soft skills. There was not one thing, nobody said, oh my gosh, this guy writes the most amazing user stories. Like that was not the thing that separated one product manager from another. Right? It was all about the soft skills. And then as I analyzed, I kind of bucketed it into these categories, which is their skills around influence, right? Product management is a total game of influence. It's really rare that anybody reports directly to a product manager, right? It's all about influence. And even if they do report to you, it's still all about influence. Then there's a bunch of stuff around ownership. There's a bunch of stuff around competency. And then there's a bunch of stuff around what I call Zoom. It's probably the one bucket in here of the 4 buckets, which isn't transparent from the name, what it means. And so we'll get into what they mean. So if we walk into this a little bit, let's talk about influence. And what I will say on these and this conversation generally, this is a breadth conversation, not a depth conversation. Any one of these topics, I could give you an hour or 2 hours of content around the topic. I can't do that today. So I'm intentionally trying to like go broad across a bunch of stuff. If there's something in there that resonates with you, you're like, oh, actually, I would like the depth conversation on that piece. Ping me. Also, most of this stuff you could go find additional content online or things like that, and so that you can find it. So I'm trying to pique your interest in a bunch of things versus give you a really specific skill set on one thing. Now, so in this topic of influence, the first thing I say, I think the three most important things, there's certainly other things, but the three most aspects of influence as a product manager. One, I think it comes down to relationships. I like to think about relationships as, and this probably comes from my heavy networking background early in my product career. I think of them as hops: 1-hop relationships, 2-hop relationships, 3-hop relationships. And I encourage people to build intentional strategies. Your 1-hop relationships, you should nurture those relationships at least weekly. Right? And those are your boss, your peers, the people that work for you, like that kind of thing. Then your 2-hop relationships, it's your boss's boss, it's the boss of your main partner on the engineering side or stuff like that. A little less frequency, but still pretty frequent. And then 3-hop relationships. And so the idea is like, how many hops out can you get, but are you taking care of all those relationships? And yeah, let's see. Is this one? Well, it's not actually on, but the light feels stronger. I don't know if this one's going to work. Like it says it's on. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. I'll keep trying this one until I have higher confidence in that one. And there's a whole bunch of additional strategies around relationships, but that's the first thing is like, and you know, if you're earlier in your career, this may be a bigger like aha to you. If you're late in your career, you probably figured this out. But the relationship's super important. The second thing is around executive presence. And I don't have time to do justice to the topic of executive presence, so I put a link to my favorite book on it, which is, there's actually a book which is called, guess what, Executive Presence. It's the name of the book. And I found it to be a really thoughtful overview and something to look at. And what I love about it is if I see somebody who I think could use some improvement in their executive presence, I can point them to this book and then they can look at it and then we can have a conversation. We can talk about it. I had an interesting conversation recently with somebody on one of my teams about their executive presence. And I said, hey, on the one hand, there's a set of things that you do which give people confidence in you. And then you immediately do something in that same context which causes them to lose confidence in you. And you're like undermining yourself. And so if you could dial back this behavior a little bit and keep accelerating that behavior, you're going to have way more confidence in you from people. And so there's little subtleties like that which help with that. Then the third thing here is around what I've used a lot of words for it. I'm just going to say there's this concept of positional power, right? Which is if somebody works directly for you, or if you have a title or a role, like say product manager. When you do things and your logic is, we should do this because I'm the product manager, that is using positional power. I have a rule, which is you should never use positional power. One, like, or it may get you some gain very near term. It will undermine influence over time like crazy. It will create a very bad culture and just have negative impact. So like, if you ever catch yourself falling into the trap of like, maybe you're really in a conflict with your engineering team, you think you should do one thing, they think you should do another, and you're tempted to say, well, we should do it because what don't you understand about I'm the product manager? You should probably put yourself in timeout. And you should come back with, here's the data, here's what the customers think, these are the business requirements. Like, you should come back with logic and with rationale and keep going until you can align. You should never just pull that I'm the product manager card. So that's about influence. There's other things there, but those are some things about influence. Now, if we talk about ownership, like you're looking for people that have this mindset of extreme accountability, almost like over accountability, right? They feel accountable for things that you wouldn't even maybe expect them to feel accountable for. Like, that's what it takes to succeed as a product manager, is this sense of just like extreme accountability. You need to find people who are good at rapid decision making. A product manager will make 1,000 decisions in a week. And so some people, like I know one of my kids is really intelligent, really hardworking, and terrible at closing in on a decision. And really values when I just make a decision for her. And so we're working on that, because that goes back to positional power a little bit. Like, I don't want to make your decisions, you make your decisions. But you need to find people who can make decisions, you know, at a rate of 1,000 decisions in a week. And then the third thing I'll say around ownership is people who like to fill vacuums. And I have this theory of vacuums in a company. Should we try it? Oh my gosh, you guys, this is amazing. It's amazing what really smart people can do. Thank you for your help. My theory of vacuums is that in any company, there are vacuums. There are things that would benefit the company if they could be done, but it's nobody's job to do it. And one of the best things you can do to increase influence or to increase your kind of brand in a company is to take on a vacuum and solve it and fill a space without anybody asking you to. One of the interesting things about vacuums, I'm not convinced that this is better. One of the interesting things about vacuums is that you don't typically need to ask permission to fill a vacuum. As long as you don't drop the ball in your day job, just go fill a vacuum and everybody will be delighted. Go do it, and it increases your influence. And it shows stronger ownership, right? And will help you get recognition. The third thing is competency. So you want people who have a constant learning mindset, right? They just have an insatiable appetite to learn. They're curious about everything. They learn. You want people who are coachable. And my favorite framework for helping people to learn and to build competency, there's a thing out there that there's a lot to understand about it. I don't have time to go deep in it, but there's a thing called the conscious competency model. I'm not even going to go over what the model is. I'll just tell you, if you're not aware of it, go understand it. It will help you both as you try and learn and as you engage with your manager or people that mentor you. It will also help you in your products as you think about how to onboard customers and why maybe they churn out. Because one of the main reasons customers churn out is because your product made them feel dumb, and nobody likes to feel dumb. And so it's here for my self-esteem when you make me feel dumb to say, I'm not dumb, you're dumb, and I'll go do something else. So the conscious competency will help in both those contexts, but it also like having an open conversation about how we're progressing in our competency and making that safe accelerates everybody's learning. And then the third thing on here, I also have this theory, like, it's not that I'm down on mentors, but if you look at the coach and that gift down there, like, have you ever had a mentor that behaves like that when you're in a mentor session? Like the point is, like, you want people who are coaching you or mentoring you who are way more invested in the outcome than your average mentor. And you want people who understand that and who will go find that and who value that and seek that out. Look for coaches. Okay, I have no idea what I just did. Actually, I do know what I just did. I accidentally clicked the wrong button. So the next piece on here is the Zoom aspect. This is one I said I was going to have to categorize for you a little bit. You need people that have the ability to think broadly about things, but then execute really narrowly, right? So in their mind, I think of this way, which is they have both a telescope and a microscope, right? So when they think about things and when they make plans, they look through their telescope. And then when they execute, they look through their microscope. Like, you need people that have that broad range. That shows up in other ways, which is you also need people that are really good at establishing anchors. And as a product manager, you do this again and again and again, which is you're constantly helping the people around you to anchor to the why, to anchor to the customer why, to anchor to the business why. And you should be doing this 10 or 15 times a day, right? Like, every conversation you have, you should immediately start with, okay, let's all step back and remember why we're doing this. It's about this for the customer. It's about this for the business. And then it comes to the last thing, which is the Zoom aspect, which is you need to be able to start at the 30,000 foot view and get down to the 100-foot view and do that in about 30 seconds. And then you need to do it again. And then you need to do it again. And you need to build a map. Okay, this is the company's mission, remember? And that's why this defect is important, right? Like, you have to be able to, like, traverse that super fast and link that all together. So those are all like the rock star attributes that I've looked at. So again, that was like the first step in this process of find people that could be rock stars. The second step of the process we're getting into, which is how do you help them to know what to do. Now, I've had good success in what I call like guiding principles. And so what I do is I create a framework of guiding principles for the team and communicate that to them. They have to be simple and kind of concrete and easy to understand. But I take those guiding principles and they become kind of like track or the rails on a roller coaster, right? It's the thing that makes it so we can safely all go fast and have fun, is these guiding principles. And so here at Lucid, our guiding principles, and the Lucidites in here, I was tempted to have you like stand up and recite them, but we're not going to make you do that. But the summary is like, there's 4 things that we really focus on. That is my definition of what it takes to be great at product at Lucid. First one is to find the intersection. We'll talk about what that means. The second one is maximize the speed of learning. The third is to build to delight. And the fourth is to move metrics that matter. So if we break into those, I'm not going to read these definitions, but I will talk about them a little bit, and you can choose to read the definition if you want. But finding the intersection, this is important to me. Fundamentally, I think that the core job of a product manager, the reason companies hire product managers, is to have somebody who is in charge of finding the intersection between customer value and business value. That's what a product manager does. They find the intersection between customer value and business value, and they live in that intersection. And they avoid the temptation to do things just for business value. Every now and then, they may do things just for customer value. But for the most part, they should just live in the intersection. And then I think the last sentence in here is worth reading, which is that the strongest measure that the intersection has been found and actualized is profitable revenue growth. Like, that's when you know you're playing in the intersection. So find the intersection. That's the first step to succeeding as a product manager. I didn't mean to click that yet. I meant to actually just scroll over and zoom. So the second one, maximize the speed of learning. All innovation is gated by the rate at which we learn. And so the faster you learn, the faster you can innovate. Broadly true in any context. So we have a rabid, insatiable appetite at Lucid to learn and to learn fast. And if there is a way that we could learn faster, cheaper, or at lower fidelity, we're in. And we're constantly pushing the boundary on how fast can we do that. I think that the best teams, they're learning something significant about what they're working on at least once a day through observation or experimentation. The best teams actually, I think, can do a higher rate than that. But that should be, I think, the starting bar for everybody. Be like, hey, we have a goal as a team to learn something important about our product at least once a day through observation or experimentation, and do it more frequently if possible. So the third thing on here, building to delight. It's a little easier to understand. There's kind of 2 sides to this statement. The first is the reason we get out of the bed in morning is to delight our customers. The second part to this is we're not done building until we've delighted our customers. Simple concept. Third one, move metrics that matter. The simple statement on this one is, if it doesn't matter to the customer and it doesn't matter to the business, it doesn't matter to us. And I've actually seen, every company I've been at, I've seen people do some really interesting instrumentation or tests against things that don't matter. And sometimes they think it does, but it kind of doesn't. So I'll give you an example. Like I've seen teams feel like the way to feel like they've succeeded at some new feature they built is to show that that feature got a lot of people to use it. And the way they do that is they do an overlay in the UI. So there's nothing else you can do but go use that new feature they introduced. And then what they've done is they've actually distracted every single customer from the thing they came there to do, which is probably not good, right? It's like, that's not great behavior, unless the only thing your product does is that one feature. Well, then maybe that's okay. And so things like that, like I'm really sensitive to, like, let's make sure we measure the right stuff and don't do the wrong thing. So that is, I think, a framework, and you can pick your own framework and you can borrow from this one. But the important thing here is, like, you need some set of guiding principles that you can stand up in front of the whole team and say, we may have just, no, it came back. And that says, hey, this is what the expectation is. This is what a good job looks like. If you will just adhere to these 4 things, you're going to succeed here. You're going to do a good job. You're going to be able to build a great product and have a great career. Okay, so that's back up to, we found rock stars. We help them know what they're supposed to do. Now we're going to talk about providing them with a framework and the tools and the knowledge and how they can do it. So on this one, one of the things we've been experimenting with Lucid, there's a bunch of ways to try and provide this knowledge to people, or to provide these frameworks to people. We've been experimenting with Lucid. We've had this idea of, like, hey, could we actually just stand up a series of boot camps? And anybody new to Lucid, what you do is within your first 6 months, you go through 3 boot camps. And the boot camps are designed like design sprints, right? So it's like a cross-functional team comes together. I'll try this. Maybe should I? Okay. So cross-functional team comes together, and what we like about the structure of the boot camp is that while it's a learning experience and they're doing things, the things that they're doing, the things that they're learning, they're applying to their work, right? So like they're doing real work in the boot camp. They're not doing fake work. That's why we get the cross-functional team. So we get the actual cross-functional team. We pull them in. They do real work, practicing the skills we're teaching them. And so the 3 boot camps that we run, we have one which is around rapid de-risking. We'll talk about that. The other one is around getting signal. Those 2 things are both part of a bigger construct, which I talk about learning, right? So those are 2 flavors of how you learn as a product manager, is through de-risking and through gathering signal. And so we'll talk about those. Then the third one is a thing that I've developed over years called product fundamentals. And I didn't used to call it that, but that's what we call it now. And then at Lucid, our abbreviation for it is #ProdFun. That's what it is. It's fun. So if we talk about these a little bit, the constructs of these, and whether you do your own or not, whatever, but I'll give you an example of what the de-risking boot camp is meant to do. So design sprints, so it's like 3-4 days of a cross-functional team, hardcore going after it. What we're teaching them, and then what they're doing toward their real problems is we're teaching them, okay, how do you create a really good hypothesis of something that you want to do? Then against that hypothesis, how do you identify the risks associated with it? An easy way to think about this is you basically are asking the question, what has to be true for this to work? And it's likely that every answer to that question is a point of risk. Those are all the assumptions. Those are all the things that have to be true for it to work. Works in methodologies, think about that. Then we have and categorize those risks. I like to do it against this rubric, which comes from the book Inspired, because I just think it's an easy way for everybody to get their heads around it. You could have a different framework, but we categorize them against, are they questions of viability? Are they questions of value? Are they questions of feasibility? Are they questions of usability? And then we have them take those and we have them identify potential de-risking methodologies. And we have them kind of use 2 frameworks to do it. One, you can see that I'm pointing to the thing at the bottom, which has like the 1 day, 3 day, 1 week. It's really interesting when you ask a team and say, hey, how would you de-risk this thing? How would you test to see if this assumption is true? And you'll get a broad range of answers and you say, okay, but how would you do that today? How can you get an answer today? Well, that's very different maybe than how would you do that if you had a month? And there's interesting things, right? Which is like the difference between what you can do today when you do the month. One, a month takes a lot more time and investment. You may also get a higher fidelity and higher confidence answer if you take a month. But this framework of a day, 3 days, a week, a month, more than a month, lets you then zone and be like, okay, given the nature of the risk and given the time we have and stuff like that, where's the sweet spot, right? Do we want to give ourselves a week or do we just want to give ourselves a day? And then the second thing is, and Jerem, help me if I pronounce this wrong, the enchiridion, did I get it right? Oh my gosh. So we meaning Jerem, built the enchiridion of de-risking, which is 180 slides of de-risking methodologies in each of these categories. So we have each of the 4 categories, and it's like, these are all the ways to de-risk viability. These are all the ways to de-risk value. These are all the ways to de-risk. And so you basically take that and you go look at the enchiridion and you're like, okay, these are methodologies for how to answer this question. Which one fits in a day? Which fits in 3 days? And so you pull that all together and that gives you the whole framework. Then the final thing that you do is you select, which of the methodologies you want to use. You look at these risks, their relative priority, and then you build actually a sequenced de-risking plan. So you're going to start with your biggest like showstopper deal breaker risks and get out to more risks that are more, you're just going to pivot, but it doesn't kill the business, right? And you do those in order and get through it. So that's what that de-risking boot camp does. I am a huge believer. I did it again, but at least I know what I did. So, okay. So the next one, getting signal. This boot camp we haven't built yet. We haven't run it yet. So I can't tell you it's as awesome as I know the other one is because we've actually run it and we know it's awesome. But what I imagine as we like, my intent is, maybe in the next 6 months, we'll build this boot camp. And it may end up covering more than this, but what I think needs to be in here, at least it's got to be really deep on A/B testing concepts. How do you stand up and understand a good A/B test? It's got to be really good on product analytics, like, and making sure people have the statistical aptitude and understanding. They know how to engage with the analyst, but they also know how to be the analyst. And it's got to be really good at user testing, right? Like how do you moderate a user test? How do you build a good user testing plan? How do you make sure that you are not leading the witness? All those types of things. And then competitive research, like where do you access it? How do you do it? Those types of things. I think it's got to cover at least those 4 buckets for me to feel like that's a good boot camp and would cover off what I mean. And I think between the de-risking boot camp and the getting signal boot camp, you've actually covered all the types of learning that I really want product managers to be good at as they go through their jobs. Okay, so then the last piece to this is product fundamentals. And what product fundamentals is meant to do, well, I'll tell you what it is not, and then I'll tell you what it is. It is not a research methodology. It assumes that coming into this product fundamentals bootcamp, do you actually have already gotten signal? That you've actually already kind of done de-risking. What it is, it's a consolidation framework that allows you to take all that signal, consolidate it, go through a series of exercises and come out the end with what I call a value chunks roadmap and a product strategy. So it's how you take all that signal and come to, this is what we should build and why. And so the methodology here is you start by identifying target customers. You look at what are the jobs and needs and gaps for those customers. Then if you remember from the beginning, my process is I skip to value, not to solution. Then you articulate what would be the resulting value if you could just make all of that pain disappear. And then you go to what are the implied capabilities that have to be in place in order to generate that value. Why I like doing that is when you start with value, go to implied capabilities, you've actually constrained the universe of things that could be in the solution. And so I think it makes getting to a solution easier. And it also helps you to stay more focused on the value you're trying to generate versus getting lost in the solution. And then you get to what is the possible solutions, and then you get to competing alternatives, and then you get to a value chunk roadmap. And you do all that like in a design sprint type of a thing. So it's very fast, go through it. It's not a validation process, though, right? So like you may come out at the end and you need to be honest with like, okay, have we done enough research already that we have high confidence in the outcome of this? Or is it like, no, we've got a plan here, and now we need to go validate the plan. So there may be additional steps of validation. So the way we describe the problem set is through a story. The way we describe the resulting value is through a story. The way we describe the possible solution is through a story. And so we're telling these stories, and at times we're actually getting really visual. At times we actually produce full videos to represent things. Other times they're just like this is a Lucid Spark board that has, it's kind of a customer journey map oriented thing, but it actually has the summary story, the full story of the pain, the emotional state of the customer through the journey against each of the personas on the top. And then on the bottom, it has the solution story with that same stuff, how their emotional state gets better because of the solution, how we do that. And on the very bottom, it has mock-ups of potential designs of the solution, right? So like that's an example. This is a lower fidelity example. A higher fidelity would be like full video of some of this content. So that's the product fundamentals content. And I think between those 3 boot camps together, that like if you can master that, you are a product management rock star. If you take those soft skills plus the ability to do these things, you're off the charts in my book. That's about as good as you can get. So if we come back and circle around and recap, we visited on, okay, what are attributes and kind of how do you identify rock stars, people with rock star potential? The resulting better products, more value generation, happier customers, happier employees, a better world, right? We should be able to get there, and we should be able to have our assembly line for product management rock stars. So covered all that at a high level. Happy to open up for questions or comments or whatever, please.
How long does it take you to do all that?
Yeah, so the question, and I'll try to do the way the question is asked. How long does it take to do all that? And there's multiple parts to it. One, like the boot camps, I'll tell you a couple things. Like so the boot camps are designed to fit within a week, right? And so they're 3 to 4 days, sometimes 5 days, and it's like 80% of your time for that week of a cross-functional team, which makes them sometimes challenging to schedule, right? You have to get a whole bunch of people available to do it. The other thing I'll say is it's so intensive and you're so engaged that you can't do them back to back. Like after you do one of these boot camps, you're kind of like, yeah, I loved it, but I'm not ready to do that again for about a month, right? Like I got to catch my work. Also, like it is cognitively heavy. Like this is hard work. This is the core of what product people do. I am a big believer though in time boxing those cognitively heavy things. I think you get better outcomes when you just say, we're going to do this in a week, even though they're big lifts. So my goal, and we're not running these at Lucid at the cadence and the frequency that I want yet. I will say that the product fundamentals methodology I think is well adopted. Most of our teams do this and understand that. My goal would be to say, hey, within 6 months you can do 3 boot camps. And so what I'm trying to get to is where if you're new to the Lucid team in your first 6 months, you can do the 3 boot camps and get to. We haven't accomplished that yet. We're still, as you know, like we're still trying to stand up the 3rd boot camp. So
setting aside the boot camp,
yep.
You're senior-ish person, do they do this in like a month and a half for a thing you're doing? Or?
Yeah, no, like the teams, they do this design sprint style as they do it. Now, a lot of the outcomes of these activities last longer because you come out with a de-risking plan that you have to execute. So you can get to the plan in a week. The actual de-risking can take longer, right? And then the product fundamentals, you get to the strategy and the roadmap, but now you got to go execute the roadmap. So those planning cycles, deep thinking cycles, they can be done in a week to 2 weeks. I don't think it's healthy to let them last longer. And then the execution can take quite a bit longer. There was another, please.
Yeah, just thanks for the presentation. I think one of the questions for you as a leader, right, as you're trying to adopt this across the teams, 2 questions. One is, what is the reception to this model? And then the second one is, how do you measure KPIs, the effectiveness of the model to ultimately drive business results to your level?
Mm-hmm. So the first question is the reception. I think that the people and some of my team that has been in these, like, feel free to add your perspective. I don't like, it's possible that I'm disconnected from reality, so please correct me. The feedback I've heard is like very intense, really enjoyable and engaged, but also I'm exhausted at the end of one of these boot camps. I need to recover, but I feel like I had a major increase in my competency and knowledge, and our goal is that you can go now do this again without the boot camp, right? And I think that's happening, but I don't know, Jeremy, Kevin, others, like, does that seem real? Kevin's giving us a thumbs up. Okay, now you have to realize they work for me, so maybe they're just like, yeah, whatever Dan says.
I'll say, as a product leader, sometimes people will just leave the boot camp and not revisit what they actually learned. So it's like, you have to make sure it's like, no, these are behaviors and skill sets that will take time to really master. But take what you learned, it's like a really jam-packed, but become a practitioner and a master of it over time.
Yeah. So getting to mastery doesn't happen in a week. And then the second one was like, how do we measure business impact? It's harder to measure the direct business impact of the boot camp to like our key company metrics or things like that. We can assess like, what do we think the competency level of the team is? And my metric that I'm looking for, again, is to solve that problem I started with, which is I'm looking for less variance, because like I feel like our team is really good at identifying people with the aptitude and potential to be amazing product people. We rarely hire somebody who I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. And so now what I'm trying to do is get really good at taking every one of them and helping them hit that potential. That's how I'm measuring it. Is are we reducing the variance, the outcomes on that? And I feel like we are, but that's a bit of an anecdotal statement.
Do you feel like you could quantify what the competency score across
teams? Yeah, we could, like, we could go measure competency, and we have a framework for a competency model for what we, how we think about tiers and product management, stuff like that. So we could look at that and see, are people increasing in competency? And it'd be harder to have confidence that was that it was causal versus correlated, or like so. And I don't know that I try to go overly deep on trying to make too many strong connections, but please, you right back here.
Hi, thanks for the operational framework. I actually have a question on the soft skill side of things. So you mentioned proactively building a product vacuum, extreme accountability. Sounds like classic product. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But do you see a clear line where that mentality stops serving product folks?
Yeah, like, and I'm referring, tell me if I've got this right. I'm referring from your question, like, is there a line? I'm assuming that line is like, is there a point at which maybe you've gone too far in filling vacuums? Like, or is there is there a vacuum that's too big where it's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't go after that one? Right. I think the more likely scenario is, so for example, it may be harder for one of my product managers to go fill a vacuum on the marketing team. Right, like, and mostly because the marketing team, while they may appreciate it, they may be like, why are they thinking about marketing? Why aren't they thinking about product? Right. So I think that's probably the biggest gotcha is if you go too far away from what seems natural to you, then you may cause some people to react negatively. But if you're staying in things where it's like, no, actually, I get why that's on their mind. I don't think there's a lot of boundaries in that domain. And then I will say on the example of like, hey, you want to go help with something in marketing, on that one, it's not that you can't, it's that you have to socialize that, right? Like you need to go make friends with marketing people and be like, hey, I noticed this thing. Do you notice that thing? Can I help you with that? Like, so that's one where like you probably have to socialize and ask permission versus things that are more close to your domain. You don't really even usually have to ask permission. You can just be like, hey, you guys, I'm going to do this. Who wants to help? Like, you can just kind of get in and lead. So I think that's the only subtlety I see in that. Please.
Do you have strategies for identifying like vacuums like that, or
the question was, do I have strategies for identifying vacuums like that? And the only strategy, like the top of mind strategy, I haven't thought deep enough about like that question. Part of that is like I just tend to see them. But the one thing that I do, and this comes from early in my career, I did some study into like manufacturing process engineering and how all that works. And one of the key principles is like how you recognize a constraint in a system. And one of the main ways you recognize a constraint in the system is that in a physical sense, in a physical world, there is piled up inventory immediately ahead of that constraint, right? And so that's what I look for, is I look for, okay, where is a place where there's just a backlog of stuff that's not happening or that's going too slow. And then I'll analyze that and I'll be like, well, why is that going too slow? And it's like, oh, it's because there's this constraint there. And so then how do I offload that constraint? How do I either add more capacity or make it better? So that's one of my classic things that I like, but it's probably because of that early influence. And I don't, there's probably 10 other ways. But I look for, like, I think, that's my mental model is a problem. And so that's the first thing I would do in that situation with recurring conflicts. So I would back up and take another look and be like, have we actually identified the right problem? It's really like we're talking past each other. We're not actually talking about the right thing. The second thing that I would add, and this one I'm sure is a lot less conventional, but is very much a part of how I approach my work and who I am. And I'll tell you the short version of the story. It was actually when I was working with Family Search, some Family Search people here, some Family Search people online. It's an environment that has different views about conflict. Like, it's not that there isn't conflict, but it's, let's say I could have conflict at Adobe in a different way than I can have conflict at Family Search, like if I chose to. I didn't choose to, but I could have. And so I found myself in a situation with another employee with the conflict was so high that even for me, who I have a very high tolerance for conflict, even for me, it was becoming uncomfortable. And I was really worried about it. And so much so that I wasn't sleeping very well. And what happened is I actually had a dream. And I apologize for going to what some of you may seem like a more spiritual tone on this, but like I had this dream, and in the dream, at the end of the dream, basically like things got so bad, I thought that we were going to like have a physical conflict, right? As I'm dreaming about the situation. And then at the end, the dream kind of ends, and these words come into my mind as clear as day: compassion will cure that conflict. And that's something I've tried to practice ever since then, is when I get into conflict that is hard to resolve, one, I look for, are we talking about the right problem? And two, I look at it and say, am I having enough compassion about their perspective? And I go do that, and I try to make sure that I deeply, deeply understand why they feel how they feel. And usually through those two things, the conflict can be resolved. And it's not always the most intuitive thing to go approach somebody that you think is crazy and wrong and try to go have a lot of compassion for their perspective. So, other thoughts, questions, please. Yeah, if so, questions I asked if I'm looking for somebody who's a rock star, there are questions around some of those things, right? I'm trying to get a sense of the curiosity of their learning, things like that. I have a friend, Josh Penrod, some of you maybe know Josh, good friend. Josh talks about this as like, he calls them high agency individuals. So one of my favorite questions to ask them, I think this tees into learning and ownership a little bit, is to ask them, tell me a situation where everybody around you told you something couldn't be done, but you figured out how to do it anyways. It's one of my favorite questions, and that gets into a lot of soft skills of like, it gets into grit, it gets into their ability to navigate stuff. They usually have stories about how they had to influence or stuff like that. And so that is a question I really love, because it gets at the heart of many of the attributes of what it takes to be a rock star. And so I think like that's my starting point. Another thing that I will often do is ask motivational questions. So I'll ask a question of, what gives you the feeling in your work? Like, when do you go home at the end of the day and you're like, oh my gosh, I had the best job in the world? Just unpacking that with people unlocks a lot of like how they're wired and their aptitudes. And then I'll ask the inverse questions, like, when do you go home at the end of the day and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get into the job. I can't do this anymore. What gives you that feeling? And they're really important for many reasons, but those are other angles to how to try to get into that a little bit. Please.
So you mentioned about the cross-functional teams for this boot camp. So how much is the involvement from the other business areas like marketing, sales, and engineering on producing this output, and how aligned are they with the output? Right?
Yeah. So the question is like how involved are the other functions in that cross-functional team in a boot camp? And like how I'm assuming is like how much of the time, how invested are they, but also how aligned are they with the output? We refuse to do a boot camp if we can't get the product marketing, the engineering, the UX counterparts in there for the same amount of time as the product people. Like, it doesn't make sense to do the boot camp if they're, so we ask them for 80% of their time that week as well. And because of that, when you go through an experience like that, if you've done it before, you come out very aligned, right? Because you invested a lot of time and so we expect groups to continue doing that. And so there's two things that we try to do to perpetuate it. One is we expect them, whenever they realize, oh my gosh, we need to de-risk something, we expect them to run a process. Depending on how thick that question is, they may benefit from like a full week design sprint style approach, or maybe like, no, actually, we can just, do this in an afternoon. So it just depends on the thickness of the thing. So that's the one thing we expect them to just like to keep using the methodology and to expand or contract based on the complexity of the problem. The second thing that we do, that we envision doing, we've done it with the product fundamentals. We haven't done it yet with the de-risking bootcamp, but what we envision is that the people who went to the bootcamp now become the leaders of the next bootcamps. And so they're not on a cross-functional team, but now they're in the teaching. So it's kind of the idea like when you teach something, you internalize a lot more. That we haven't done it yet. So other than product fundamentals, we've done some of that. And the people who have gone off and led product fundamentals after they've gone through it have become way more adept at it. So there's some reason to believe that would work, but we haven't done it with de-risking yet. Other questions? Please.
When you were in the finding the intersection section, it talks to trying to balance customer value against business value and the importance of always making sure customer values evolve. I found it interesting that the metric identified at the end was primarily a business value metric. I learned to talk a little bit about why that does protect customer value still, because I feel like sometimes you can mislead on revenue metrics.
Yeah, so the question is, in the topic of finding the intersection between customer value and business value, why is it that end statement of the ultimate measure of how you've done that is a business metric of profitable revenue growth? And is there a risk that could mislead you, could misguide you, and cause you to go more down the business side? This is my logic on it, which is, if you don't pay attention to customer value, you will not retain customers, and you will not be able to have profitable business growth if you can't retain customers. Unless your business model is intentionally of like, we're going to burn it all out and then we're done. Have at it. I wouldn't work for you, but it is like, you could do that, right? Like, but that's what would happen, right? Is you would burn it all out and be done. And for like a couple of years, you may be super happy. You're comfortable with that. great. You probably end up in court too, but but that's the logic, is like you're not going to get customer retention that would allow you to have that profitable growth unless you take care of the customer. Other questions, please.
So with your theory on Zoom, seeing the big picture and then narrowing it down, how do you like convince people that doing that small thing will help you on the too big a picture and not staying away from scope creep? Because I have some people that I work with that are like, yeah, well, if we do this one little thing, why can't we just do all of the other things?
Yeah. So the question was in Zoom, like thinking really big, but then you got a small thing. One, how do you help people understand that the small thing really is critical to the big picture? And two, how do you keep scope creep from happening of like adjacent small things that you feel shouldn't happen yet, right? How do you do that? So the first thing I would say is like you actually have to, in your mind, and probably even have documented, you have to have a taxonomy from the top to the bottom that actually shows the relationship between all the different layers of logic and thinking. So like, this is the mission. This is how the mission relates to the strategy. This is how the strategy relates to my roadmap. This is like, you have to actually understand all that and be able to link it all together. And then you can answer some of those questions. The second thing I'll say, and my major tactic for this type of stuff, and sometimes I feel guilty about it, not very often. But what I will do to help somebody through that is I actually think through a series of questions where I'm like, if I ask these questions, a logical person answering these questions will arrive at the same conclusion that I have. And then I will sit down and I will ask people a series of questions. And I have a pretty high hit rate of people coming to their own conclusion, which was also the conclusion I came to because we asked a similar set of questions. Now, the reason sometimes I feel guilty is because sometimes I'm like, is that a little bit manipulative? I kind of like, they didn't know what I just did, but I kind of walked them through, a series of questions with an intent to help them get to where I am. But the honest thing is like, I do that. So you can tell me I'm bad, but I do that. Anyways, looks like Nick wants some attention.
Take one more question.
Okay, one more question, please.
Yeah, I was curious, it looked like the key to a good product manager is being able to make 1,000 decisions rapidly. Then you have a risk framework that really kind of slows down the decision-making process. How do you rectify that? Is there a little bit too much in this boot camp that trains product managers to know every answer before you do something? Or anyway, I was curious how.
Yeah, so the question is like, if you have to make 1,000 decisions really rapidly, how do you have time to do this de-risking boot camp and a deeper, thicker process? And the de-risking process, the boot camp is the big process. The boot camp is like, so the boot camp is a process you run if you're like, hey, should we enter this new market? You better run that boot camp, right? But if your question is, should we put the button over here? Well, don't run the boot camp. In fact, you may not need to do a de-risking thing, but sometimes there are smaller questions that will benefit from de-risking. And that's why I'm like, you have to scale those skills. So what we're really trying to do is less that we're trying to get you to always do boot camp. We're trying to make you a practitioner of a set of skills and a way of thinking. And so you can in an hour, you can analyze something through that framework, come back and be like, okay, here's a methodology of how we could this afternoon lessen the risk of what is a slightly more critical question, right? So you've got to be able to scale all the way from like, how do we, and I've done this with people, like I've had people come in and be like, hey, we're going to de-risk this in a week. And I've been like, okay, but I think I could show you how to do that in an hour. And also without spending any money or writing any code. Like, so that there's a bunch of these skill sets of like, how do you do it super fast? And that goes back to that guiding principle of maximizing the speed of learning. And so that there's a lot of coaching understanding you have to have, which is like what methodology to apply it when to get the right speed for the context that you're in. But it should I'm a huge fan of like anytime somebody comes with a de-risking plan, I'll almost always challenge. I'm like, I bet I could do it faster. I bet I could figure out how you can answer this set of questions in half that time or third. I have another presentation where I have case studies of de-risking where I've coached teams and they came and I have like, this was their original plan. This is how much investment, how much time. This was after we coached them what they did. And the numbers are like, they learned 225 times faster. Right. So I have a whole bunch of real use cases that I can share with people and show people. So like I'm very passionate about that. What it is like you have to understand end to end the skill set to be able to make good choices around that, because there are some questions that you should not be 225 times faster on. Most questions you should. So thank you for that question. That's helpful clarification.